The extreme Straussian problem is presented through the example of the so-called debate between um, two scholars, Patrick Deneen and another whose name is something like Munoz or something like that. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the problem is as follows. If let's just state it in a simple way first. If an education system is unable to produce persons who are able to comprehend a given teaching which was meant to be taught to students and passed on from teacher to student, but always and routinely produces false and bastardized versions of this teaching, can we conclude that this source of teaching, let's call it here Leo Strauss, but it could be a name over any teaching, is detrimental and even if true, should be probably well, do they actually say we should get rid of Leo Strauss? Well, in a way they do. They said that Leo Strauss is not in the political science department a major something they chiefly treat in the way they treat Jonathan Rawls or maybe Martha Minow or somebody like that. Who are their chief theorists? I think there's some English guy that's a big theorist. It's been a while since I looked at the chief political science theorists. There's a bunch of big names. But who's the text? I guess the important thing is sort of like, who does the textbook basically work in synthesis with? These are long questions. I mean, I'd say ultimately probably they operate on some kind of fact norm distinction, basically, and they sort of, I mean, why it's political science rather than political philosophy is because Weber, because Simmel, because of the some form of fact value distinction, or Wertfrei Wissenschaft, or sort of Marxian empiricism is totally in control of the global university system. I mean that in the sense that all history is written basically from the point of view that the material interests are to be put a little bit ahead of any claim of some kind of German claim to be leading with the Wert, the Außen, how do they call it? It's something like Wertegeleitete Außenpolitik or something. So I don't know what it's called, but it means something like leading with the values over the interests is our policy in Deutschland. Whereas in America, whereas in all historians surely follow something like the reverse and try to lead with do history from the point of view of putting more weight on the material circumstances, on when wagons were invented and when certain forms of industry came in and so on. If you do history on something else, on ideas, you call that history of ideas or history of political movements or something. You could study the history of liberalism from the point of view of asking who are all the actual political movements from Madame de Staël on who have been called liberal, and did they call themselves liberal, and if they called themselves liberal, what was their plank? and then just and then you wouldn't call that simply history, right? That would be, because what we take simply for history is Marxist history. History is simply about wars and about economics. That's history simpliciter. But if you have a qualified version, such as history of political ideas, then you see that you're no longer doing what the word means, taken directly phenomenologically. So we have Deneen giving a bad interpretation. So first, let me just state it dogmatically without proving it. Deneen gives a bad interpretation of Strauss. I can demonstrate this quite neatly and clearly. And then the other guy gives a debauched version of Strauss. They both give false versions of Strauss, and they both say there's also these other big, or at least Deneen says there's also these other big groups. There's a book called The Strauss Divided. That comprised how does he call it? The boosters who use Strauss to boost America and make the liberal order, and especially the American order, seem more plausible. And then there's the so-called radical Straussians, which he associates with sort of living out the philosophic life, which he assigns to Harold. I wanted to say, isn't his name? Oh, Alan Bloom. I almost said Harold Bloom. Alan Bloom, who's, for instance, on the firing line with Bill Buckley in a good episode touching on his book on the American mind and a lot of Straussian subjects. But on the whole, the question I'm asking is, what if Strauss is pointing out something true, and something which, if we do not face up to it, we're constantly going to be missing the mark and not understanding why things are going wrong. And they're saying, but wait, there's absolutely nobody that's interpreting Strauss correctly or understanding him. But then my question is, does that mean because right now there's nobody understanding him, that we have to throw this out? Or couldn't we actually teach Strauss properly? So, but this goes for any teaching. Couldn't it be that a teaching is true? The Catholics claim their teaching is true, and even though there's a lot of evidence of horrible things that happened around capitalism, that doesn't make the teaching any less true. It just means that's the circumstances hitherto that have happened in somehow hailing distance of people that are trying to order themselves according to that truth. It still could be true even if life around it were hell for an infinite number of years. It still could be true. Likewise, even if all these congeries of false interpretations of Strauss are all over the place, there could be some people. I mean, for instance, I think Michael Millerman is relatively pretty good on getting the philosophy side of. He has some sense of honing into the actual ideas, and but there's not that many people that study Strauss more from the Platonic side and less from the LARPing Harold Bloom side. I never thought Harold Bloom was really interested in philosophizing so much as he was interested in rehearsing the ideas that he learned from Strauss, which he did fairly well, I think. Fairly well, not as well as some, but if he would have, if he were more, say, in the direction of Isaiah Berlin, who had more actual care for working out ideas and for getting them right, and less for simply applying a teaching that he had in some way mastered or some way become a technician of. I think that would be the line I would say. I would say, beside from the so-called radical Straussians he's associating with Harold Bloom, who I think I would associate somewhat with LARPing, and aside from the so-called booster Straussians or West Coast Straussians who are associated with, which is strange. I would think Harvey Mansfield would be one of those. I don't know. Not sure who the booster Straussians actually are, but they're supposedly associated with boosting the image of the founders, of the philosophic dignity of the Constitution, of the philosophic dignity of the liberal order. Then I'd say there's a third thing, which is doing philosophy, and I would say, and I repeat, but this time be more explicit, I say as an example of that, if you start with Harold Bloom as a so-called radical Straussian, you could kind of see the difference between Harold Bloom and Isaiah Berlin. And you see Isaiah Berlin is more into actual philosophy, is more of a real philosopher, and that's the difference. So you would want somebody who is actually has the sensibility and is, as it were, receptive to philosophy, rather than somebody who had a technician's grasp of a ready-made teaching. And then then we could try to situate where is Deneen here? Where is Deneen? Is he somebody who merely has a technician's grasp of a ready-made teaching? No, I think he's somebody who has sort of maxed out to the full potential his own natural disposition, with arming it with available ideas, putting a sweater of the available ideas over his actual person, and it fits well. But unfortunately, his person is defective. So this is part of personality theory. We don't want the best defective personality to be guiding us. We want a sound personality to be guiding us, and then to, in addition to guiding us, be responsive to all the intellectual materials they could be responsive to, and to all the actual thinking they could be responsive to, and to everything else they could be responsive to, and make that into a well-fitting sweater that keeps them free from the cold, and put that on, and then show that as Socrates showed his fine winter wear to the Athenians, and sort of, I guess, in a way, chilled their high and darkened their sun, but nonetheless, that's how these things kind of go. I think somebody in the comments mentioned that neither of these guys really gave much respect to the actual idea of what a philosopher is, and that he's hated by that when he comes back from his journeys, he may be put to death by his fellows. And in fact, that's what's happening to Strauss. So he's being lynched, in effect, by Deneen and by Munoz, or however, I apologize for getting it wrong, but by however the other guy's name is. So let me now just give as best as I can in a quick, first I'll give the general idea of why this is a concrete error that Deneen is making. So one, Mnemosyne he identifies with history, and Mnemosyne is not history, neither, if you like, historically, nor for Strauss. So for Strauss, Mnemosyne would be more like the memory of a people. That would be more like what in Hebrew is called yizkor, and in Hebrew they have another word, historia, just like a number of languages have, including German, including English, have taken this Greek word, which is a very particular notion, history, very particular way in which human beings have cognized what's going on. And this is exactly the core of what the German idealists were all about, looking at this kind of thing. And this is very important. I mean, Strauss is very aware of this. So Strauss is very aware of how important the notion of the lenses or the ideas or the forms through which human beings have been seeing things is the deposit, as it were, to use Denis's notion of cultural deposit. Which is used often in the Catholic circumstance to talk about the deposit of the civilization or of the human race, as it were. I think something along those lines. So, yes, the one we could say, obviously, Strauss does not make this doesn't understand it this way. That could be demonstrated very easily. And it's a big deal for him. He also says the Hindus do not have the concept of history. They have rather, very shockingly in a way, but he said he discussed it with a Hindu. The closest thing to history in the Greek sense for the Hindu is Dharma. So, which is this all these cyclings of past physical deaths and rebirths, the Dhyanic cycle, and the corresponding work on the of the guilt that sort of drains down so long as one exists. So we have concepts that are. So I guess the problem would be, one, we could ask, so it's clear, I think it's very easy, we could show Denis and the other guy have not interpreted Strauss correctly. I didn't give the arguments about what the other guy was doing, but I could demonstrate that too. But it's clear that from the point of view of what Strauss is teaching, they just simply haven't understood what he's saying, and they've come up with some schlock. But is that the main issue? No, I think the main issue is whether Strauss and the tradition he comes from, the German tradition, is showing problems that if we don't address them, it will be the worse for us. If we just try to ignore that these problems are actually, this is something that's actually happening, that we actually see through these historical lenses, this corresponds, I might say, to both to Dugin, but not just to Dugin, but to every anthropologist in the world, tens of thousands of anthropologists. They all hold this thesis, that different cultures really are different, and that's even the attempt to begin and trying to say how do we start out and what's the start point? Is the start point the biological start point, which is very specific to the way of the West has constructed a view of this form of investigation called the sciences, which came out of philosophy and et cetera, or is it and which also always was sort of something done in the awareness of the Christian view of what kind of being we are, and at the same time the philosophic view of the so-called rational animal, the logos animal, which eventually becomes Christ logos, or the Holy Spirit. And so that the estrangement out of Dharma to the version of Christ, into the philosophic version of Socrates, and to the then to attempt to make this Humean counter move to say, oh, but there's these things that are really secure and we could make our science about them, and then we have to. Then there's less need to rely on what specific fickle human beings say. Instead, we could rely on groups. What all the same group says the same thing about it. So that's a problem that Hume did not anticipate. He didn't anticipate the weight of the culture problem, because what he thought is the other cultures were either sort of less civilized, less developed, or maybe they had become sort of abnormal in their development, some like an abscess or something. But basically he didn't, the problem of the specific historical lens, what kind of apparatus such as the concept of historia, the concept of Yizkor, the concept of mnemosony, what were they working with, and how did they guide themselves?